So you're going to have a sink set up here. You have a mini fridge over on the right. Up on the top, we are going to have 2 cabinets. So you'll have 2 24-inch cabinets and then some shelves in the center to hold a microwave and things like that. So we are going to have to put some bracing across here for our cabinets. So that'll be coming up next. Alright guys, what we're going to do now, we've got our top and bottom part of the upper shelf. I'm going to put a brace across here just to be able to screw in. This floor does not feel really level, so I want something to be able to anchor to. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up about 27 inches. The cabinet is going to be more up in here, but I want it below the sink. There's going to be a sink mounted here, and I want to be able to get it in there if I mount the sink ahead of time and drop it into place just in case. I want to be able to get to those bolts to be able to loosen them, move them around, get things level if there's a problem. So we're going to go 27 inches. So all I'm going to do first is just find my 27, and 27 will be the top of the stud. So I'm going to put the stud underneath the 27. And one thing I'll tell you that's a big hint on this stuff is go in and make measurements and mark it on the 2x4s, your bracing, and take some pictures before you put your drywall up. So when you go to hang your cabinets, you know exactly where everything's at and what you have in the wall. Because believe me, especially if any time passes, it becomes very difficult to remember. So we're going to do 27 right here, and then I'm going to just use a level to make a level line all the way across. So we'll take our level, set it across here, and get it nice and level, just like that. Now it's time to go ahead and cut the light fixture in. I've found center. That's my X here. I had to keep playing with it, get it exactly right because I wanted it dead center of the room. And I'm going to have to use my spider cutter with this one, which tends to make a mess. So I'm going to have to run a vac, have to wear a mask, have glasses. Main reason is I have a special cutter for this that has a big bowl on it which catches the dust, which is great. But if you remember, we placed this on top of OSB and that cutter won't work on the OSB. So we're going to have to use this one. So I'm going to go ahead and get the back going, get everything masked up, and go ahead and get this thing cut out. Okay guys, before I get into this corner, I want to show you something that a lot of guys make a mistake on. This is 5/8 inch sheetrock, very thick. If you look at these corners, if I go ahead and lay this piece on first, I can still get a screw in here, but it's going to make that very small and harder to get those screws, and it's going to be at the very edge of my sheetrock. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to put my sheetrock on this side, so then I have a much larger screwing flange on the flat here. Makes a lot of sense when you actually see it. So let's go ahead and, let's see, should be this one here. Let's see if this actually fits. So there it is, perfect fit. We'll slide it all the way up. And then when we put this one on, now I have a lot of screwing spot here, and I could screw this one in over here. It also means that I can cover up some of those screw holes and I don't have to tape them in as much. So they'll be covered by the other piece of sheetrock. So let's go ahead and put this one in. Okay guys, everybody makes mistakes, and I made a big one here. So I shouldn't say big, but I forgot to put the insulation in first. So I had it all mounted, ready to go to the bottom piece of drywall, and realized that the insulation was not in the wall. So I've unscrewed everything, fixed it, pull it down. I'll go ahead and reinstall the insulation, and then I'll go ahead and put it back up. Okay guys, we've got the insulation in now and corrected the issue of not getting it in to begin with. But there's a couple things I want to point out to you guys that I probably didn't earlier. Be sure when you're dealing with insulation that you're wearing a good N95 mask to help prevent from inhaling those fiberglass fibers. They'll get embedded in your lungs and irritate you. You'll cough for days. It's just not a good thing. Another thing, when you're doing insulation, the most important thing is I see people a lot of times, they pack more and more insulation and they think that that gives it a higher R value. It's totally the opposite of that. If you are packing that insulation, and you are taking away your R value, because the insulation factor is really the little air molecules in between the fiberglass pieces or whatever it is you're using for insulation. So you want the air pockets. When you pack it tight, it loses that R value and does not help you. Another thing, if you're putting blocking in or around plugs, things like that, you're going to have to cut the insulation back some to tuck behind it, but you do want to tuck behind it. Another thing that you can do, if it's on an exterior wall and you're worried about it, you feel like you're getting drafts through there, you can use a heat gun, but you can use foam back in those corners to make sure you fill it in. Because if you notice, when I did my electrical, I like to pop my plastic tabs off so they're out of the way. So a lot of times I'll go back and foam those if I feel like I'm getting an air draft through them. Even if you don't pop those off all the way, they still allow air in, so you may have to use a little foam. But make sure you're wearing a mask. You may even want to wear glasses because it will irritate your eyes as well. And get it in there, but pull it up. Make sure you hit all the corners. You don't leave air gaps, and make sure you're not cramming it in there. So if you have like a small area like this here, do not pack that really tight with insulation. Pack it loosely with insulation, and you'll have a much better R value. All right, so let's get to going ahead and putting the sheetrock back up and carry on. Okay, we are on to the tape and bedding part. All of the sheetrock is up. Well, the first thing you do in tape and bed, though, is you do what's called pre-mud. A lot of guys don't do that. They'll skip and they'll put their tape on and they'll just tape over. When you do that, especially if you're using paper tape, you have these huge voids. So what I like to do is I'll go and I'll pre-mud, and I'll use hot mud. Hot mud is the mud that comes in a bag that you have to mix up with water. It's going to have a number on the top that's going to say like 20. That 20 means that you have 20 minutes before it sets up. Use that because it's a stronger bond, and because you can get through multiple steps in the drywall process or the mudding process in a single day. So we're going to go ahead and apply this. Anything that is greater than about 1/8 of an inch, even this side, I will go ahead and pre-mud. The top has a big gap. There's one in the corner here, one behind the camera on the wall here. Part of that is because this room was already framed up and it was not really square. So you're going to have some of that. That's normal. But you'll go in and you'll pre-mud. Once that dries and sets up in 20 minutes, I will come back, do a light sand, make sure it's smooth, and then I will put my tape on. And I'm going to use mesh tape because I'm going to use the hot mud. You don't use mesh tape like fiberglass tape unless you are using the hot mud. If you're using regular mud, you always use paper. Paper is stronger, but the mesh tape becomes very strong if you're using hot mud. So we're going to go ahead and start applying. I'm going to mix up some of the mud. I'll bring it out here with a little water in. I'll show you how to mix it, and I'll show you how to apply it. You can go all the way down to 5 minutes on this mud, like it'll have a 5. You better be moving really quick if you've got that. I usually use that for little small repairs. But 20, they have a 45, they have a 60, I believe. So you'll have to check the numbers when you go to your big box store and see what you actually have. But 20 usually gives me enough time to get through the pre-mudding in a step pretty quick. If I'm doing a repair at a customer's home, I can get through 3 levels of actually tape and bedding in a single afternoon. and complete a job, where normally that would take me 2 or 3 days. So let's go ahead and get to pre-mudding. I'll show you how to mix it, and let's get it on the wall. Okay guys, what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and wet sand. These sponges, you get them in all the big box stores. Amazon sells them. I'll leave some links for these. But you wet it with water in a bucket, and it has some sanding grit on it. And you're just going to want to lightly sand everything and make sure that the edges are somewhat feathered out so that it makes your taping process go easier. You don't want any big clumps anywhere. But that will make everything work much better when you go to taping. So any place that you put your pre-mud, kind of clean it up. But by using this, you keep a lot of the dust down, and it does not put dust throughout a home quite as much as if you are dry sanding. Alright guys, I'm to the point where we're going to sand, clean everything up, and we're going to put on our trowel texture today. A couple of things though that you need to do. You need a good taping knife, and you need a Phillips screwdriver. You're going to go over your screw holes and make sure that you're not hearing anything. It should be like that, quiet. If you hear this, you have what's called a shiner. And instead of using your screw gun, use a Phillips screwdriver so that you don't break the paper, because a lot of times that means you struggled getting that one in. There might have been a knot in the 2x4. So you're just going to get it in just enough to go under the surface. Now, when you go over it, you don't hear anything. Now you will not have a bump when you start trying to put on your texture. One other thing, if you had to put a screw in and say you missed the 2x4, whatever, you pulled it out, it always leaves a little ridge. This was one here. Make sure that you put your Phillips screwdriver in and push it in and make that hole nice and big, because it's easier to fill that way. Then take your knife and scrape off any excess. So now when I go back and put mud there, it'll be nice and smooth and I won't see a bump. So we're going to go around today though and get off all the excess. And I usually use the knife first, and then I'll use my sander. I like to use a power sander here because it makes it quick. If you're going to do that, make sure that you're masking off that area, or you're going to have dust all through the house. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get into that and get this thing taken care of, and we're going to start putting on some texture today. And we're going to put on my special texture that I like to do, where it's not a Santa Fe, it's a lot thinner. You'll have some single lines, and we will do a fine sanding over that to make it, we have a lot of smoothed areas. So that ends up being a 2-day process to do it correctly, because it has to dry for a couple of days before I do the final sanding, and then we can paint. We also have a corner to put in. I'll show you how I do that. But other than that, it's just going to be a lot of cleanup. So let's go ahead and get to it. Another pro tip I'd like to point out to you guys, I know it's noisy because I have the vac running in the background, but I want to show you why I do that. The vac will be running like this outside of the area, and if you notice the plastic is pulled backwards, let me go ahead and turn this off. The reason that you do that is it creates a vacuum inside of the room. So it'll suck clean air into the room and the dust out through the vac instead of pushing it out into the rest of the house. So it helps keep the dust out of the house. So that's a good pro tip. Make sure that you're using your vac and run the hose inside, and it'll suck air in. It creates a vacuum. All right, guys, it's time to apply the texture. Part of this wall, most of this wall is not going to have any texture because most of it's going to be covered with cabinets, and then we have some brick paneling that's going to go in this area that the customer wants. So we are going to texture the 2 side walls all the way around in the ceiling. That's going to be our main focus. We're going to do a custom texture that I like to do, which is kind of like a Santa Fe, but Santa Fe is very thick. This is going to be a thin layer with little lines. And how that works is we apply it all, we come back later, and we are going to sand it smooth and make it sand out a lot of the flats, make it look a little nicer. It's a little more labor intensive, but the end result is great. The ceiling is going to have the same texture so that you don't have to cut in a line and have a white ceiling and painted walls. We painted all the same color, and it blends very well. Some of the things to keep in mind, I like to use a knife to make my actual lines. You can do it with the trowel, but I tend to prefer the knife. Now, I will put most of it on with the trowel. And when it comes to a trowel for drywall, be careful if you go to buy one. They have them curved, where they will curve like this. You want a flat trowel. You don't want the curve. The curve works great for the tape and bedding areas and getting into those spots. I never really use that. I always use a flat. So I will use that. I will also be using a hawk to hold the mud and to take the mud on and off, especially while doing the ceiling. But pretty much all of it works pretty well. Sometimes I use a steel pan. If you watch a lot of my videos, you'll see me using a steel pan a lot. But on this one, we will be using the hawk. When it comes to your mud, I have other videos showing how to mix the mud. But you want your mud just a little bit watery. Now, if you read the boxes or the buckets of mud when you get it, they tell you that you need to mix it again. Always mix. But while you're mixing, go ahead and add a little water. I usually add a cup or two of water and water it down just a little so it makes it go on smoother and easier. So when it comes to doing the texture, you're going to be putting a lot of mud on this wall, or the walls. So it's going to take a good 24, 48 hours to dry fully. So if you're doing this on a weekly type job, or even if it's your job in the evenings, try to do this on a Friday so it'll have all weekend to set up so you can come back and do your sanding and cleanup following Monday. Usually works best if you can do that. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start on the ceiling first, and then I'm going to work my way down the walls. Like I said, we're not going to put much here. I may put a skim coat in this area just because the back of that will show inside of the cabinet, but that's really about the only thing that's going to show here. Everything else is going to be covered. So let's go ahead and get to it.